It's cool. Cora carries secrets her daughter can't know. Freya is frightened by what her mother leaves unsaid. An angel will only bury the past if it means putting her abusers into the ground. One act of violence sets 3 women on a collision course, each desperate to find the truth. But the people they love are not what they seem. So I was interested in the long, it's sort of psychological, so the pace is very, very fast paced. You meet Cora, she's run away, you don't know if she's done something, something's happened to her, and you follow, it's like a week time, so it's very compressed, but actually the story that I'm telling is all these 2 girls who are the same sort of age, 18, 19, and this woman Cora, who's an artist, who's escaped or run away from this cabin in the woods. Anyone who's read Little Red Riding Hood will know that it's like super scary. But what I was looking at the heart of the book, and I don't think this is too much of the spoiler, is the long-term effects of sexual trauma. And I've always been fascinated by the book Lolita by Nabokov, which is, so in some ways this book is Lolita's reply. I first read Lolita when I was like 14 or 15. And I remember reading it and I'm thinking, these critics are wrong. This is not a work of genius. It is, because Nabokov writes so brilliantly. But that little girl, she dies at the end. You know, this ghastly death. And it stayed with me. What happens if a little girl fights back and is so filled with rage that she only is fury? And that's Angel. So she's hunting down men who look at her, and she's got, that is her kind of mission, is to kind of wipe out every single man who looked at her on the internet. That story came from, I was an investigative journalist when I first moved back to South Africa, because I lived in Namibia in the 90s, and then I went to the US and got an education sort of, and then went back to Cape Town. And I did a lot of investigative stuff around organized crime, the implications of crime, spectrum of rape crisis for a long time. I did this one piece, somebody contacted me, and they said this guy has set up as a photographer in Cape Town, and what he's doing is, he was actually one of these victims, he's kind of dragging people and then filming it, and it was right at the beginning of this online stuff. So there's no laws against it, it was the Wild West. It still is, but at least there's a bit more awareness. So I traced and interviewed 5 young women. One was a crack addict, and she kind of knew what she was doing. They were very young. Others have offered, they thought it was a job. They were these poor girls who were like being recruited by a modeling agency. And all the nasty things that you can imagine were there. Marie Claire published it. We got a takedown notice of the guy who was arrested. There's no crime, because it's like a virtual crime in those days. But one girl, she said to me, and I've been doing work with rape crisis, so you know, like the fantasy of psychotherapy is that you'll reach a point, I think it is often a fantasy, that whatever has happened to you, this traumatic event, you can move on from, you know, that terrible phrase, move on, as if a trauma or a loss of someone is a kind of traffic island that you leave behind. Anyway.
The toll gate.
Yeah, toll gate. Yes, it does. You pay your taxes here. But there was something about this, the possibility of overcoming trauma. People do, and all sorts of things. This girl said to me, it never stops. Even when I'm asleep, it's happening again. And it made me realize that the crime is repeated each time this thing is. And I thought, so for years I thought, how do I write about a crime that never stops? It really, you'll know this, writers are very literal people. You think, oh, what is that? How do you do this thing? Because it was so vivid. This girl's husband, she got married, and he phoned me 5 or 6 years after I'd done the story, said she's outside, she wants to jump, this clip has come up again, what must I, and it was true with her. So that stayed with me, and then I actually wrote a Claire Hart, the 6th one, in which Claire investigates, sort of called like exploitative images of children. And I realized that in that form, the detective film, I just was reproducing the gaze of the child. She would be looking at these things that should never have been seen. So then my next question was, how do I write a book about images in which you never see the images? You don't see them. You are with, because we want to see images. You know this is a crime. Like anyone who reads crime fiction, it's really exciting because it's happening over there. And there's a lot of what I call scopic power. You're in the position of the voyeur and you think, oh my God, it's terrible, but let me watch. We all have this horrible aspect to our characters, that cruel factor. And I thought, what happens if I get rid of that? So you don't see the pictures. You see the people's responses to that. And so those were all very complicated things, but it also was about female rage and fury. And what happens when they stop being nice? Those of you who get to the end of the book answer that question. What happens when women just are not nice? It has a terrible effect.
Well, I get that, but I read the book, and I think the first thing that came to me, I think some years ago I wrote a screenplay about a woman that was raped by armed robbers on our wedding night. And I remember there would be times when I would be working in the middle of the night, and it was a mistaken identity. The armed robbers just went into the wrong hotel room, and they raped this woman. And I would finish reading or writing the effects of this woman and on the marriage after that. And there are times when I would actually just close my laptop and I would sob, like literally sob, because I was like, if this was real, and I know it has happened, everything is stranger than fiction, you know what I mean? So I finished reading this book and I was like, how many times did you stop and literally cry and just let it out kind of thing? Because it's such a harrowing experience, just reading through this women's constant. So the rage doesn't bother me because I think that it should be full of anger. But how do you deal with the constant replay of the crime and living through it through them?
Me as personally,
as a writer now,
I think part of the reason why it took so long to write, because it was very difficult to get. It took me a long time to get from the surface right down to what I understood to be the visceral feeling of something that doesn't leave you, and that in a way forms you, especially if you're young when something like this happens. So Angel, the girl who's this kind of fury machine. Those of you who know the cartoon Tank Girl, I often had the idea of Tank Girl in mind. But she's lost her mother, so in many ways it is a book about mothers and daughters, and the sort of resilience and protection that a mother can give her daughter, and what happens if she loses that. So her mother, I used the story of Lolita where the mother is killed, because I always thought the mother got a bad rap in that book. All of you will have to go and read Lolita again. So I did find it difficult, but it was, I don't know, I mean, you know this, you're a writer. It's like having a mental disorder. I was saying that at lunchtime today. You get obsessed with this question, and you can't leave it until you've got to an answer. And I felt within the book, like these books were so much based on reality, a kind of distillation of reality. This one is based on reality, but it's also got the great power of fiction and imaginative capacity, which is, I think, the things that allows people to heal. As a writer or as a person who's gone through a terrible trauma, somehow a part of you can imagine yourself intact. And that's what a perpetrator never has. They have no imagination. All they can do is steal from another person their essence. That's what they try to get. So I don't know why I wanted to torture everyone. But the ending is fantastic. I love that.
I love it.
Yes.
Okay, so let's talk about the ending. Let's talk about the ending. Okay,
No,
so
we can't talk about
I don't know. We can talk about it quickly. So I have a problem. It's a pet peeve of mine. So you watch a movie and this guy has done all these bad things. So this girl has done all this bad things, and then the good guy comes and takes a gun and then like push, and then it's gone. That was too easy. I just spent 90 minutes of my life watching this guy create carnage.
Yes.
And then somebody comes and just
Sorts it out.
sorts it out, you know. But in this book, what I really loved was, you know, how painfully the bad people died.
So satisfying. Like, yes, it was so satisfying. So I'll tell you, you asked me how I wrote it.
Yeah.
I wrote the end first.
Really? That's great.
Yes, because you know it's like going a book, writing a book is like going on a car journey. Imagine when you're small, you get in the car and your parents will be driving to Stockholm. So wherever you are in Namibia, you know how long it takes. 4 hours from Windhoek, 7 hours from Tsumeb, or whatever. You know what it takes. Imagine they got in the car and they just drove, like my parents used to. They just drove without telling you
The destination.
how long you were going to be in the car. And my parents got in the car and drove, and my dad was doing his lions and starting family planning clinics. So they would sit in the front, and we had a big 4x4 from the government in the 1970s, which had mesh to keep us in. And then they would give us a packet of Mari biscuits and some Oros, and me and my brother and sister would roll around in the back for years. Years! We could have drive for 16 hours. We could have rationed the biscuits. We could have eaten my little brother. All sorts of things. But no, that's not entirely false. It's not entirely false. There's a kernel of truth. We did spend a lot of time in the back of the car. And so for me, I have to know where the destination is. So then with my characters, because they are imaginative beings, I know I'm going to get them through the hard thing. I mean, that's the difference between hard thing of life. You don't know when if you'll get through. You never know. But in fiction, you can you know where you're going. So it is a bit like 17 hours in the car with one packet of Mari biscuits in it. But it does get to a very satisfying end. So that, in a way, is how you do it and how I did it.
Well, let's talk about the crime itself. So in this book, it's a lot about child pornography, pedophilia, and for some reason it seems to me that all the crime, the bad guys here are guys. They're men.
That's a shock.
For me, it's a shock because we're now living in a world of gray areas. So when you think about Maxwell and what she did or apparently did for Jeffrey Epstein, there's a lot of facilitation that seems to happen from the female gender point of view. You know, when you think about so many things that are, what you can say, happening to the female gender, when you look at the value chain, it seems as if down the line, females actually either enhance or facilitate or endorse this behavior in some way. I don't know. But
I go to that. So my book Water Music was about, it's actually very rare. It does happen, and there's like Rosemary West and Fred West, or really famous, Myra Hindley and Ian Bradley. You sometimes get this, Maxwell and Epstein as a classic one, you get these strange kind of cathexis between two people, joining up with two people where this cruelty or this sort of stuff sort of happens, but it's actually extremely rare statistically, and I give you all sorts of statistical books. That at the center of this Bafora who escapes, she and all the people who've committed crimes have actually been sentenced and punished by the law. So I was interested in the fact that it seems that the legal system doesn't do women much of a service. It's not. It doesn't.
Especially in the space of virtual crime.
in a
Because
virtual
virtual
crime,
actually means that it didn't really happen.
yes, a lot of people say, and a lot, I have
Because
interviewed.
apparently he raped him.
Yes, I've interviewed a number of people who've watched this, and they don't think they're committing a crime by looking at these pornographic images. I was also interested, it's become like the crime of our era. You know what I mean? And so it's come to stand in for a certain amount of evil, like the Inquisition thought saying that the earth was round was the greatest crime. You know what I mean? So you've had different crimes. So I was interested in this and very interested in what effect it has long term on children whose faith in the world is shattered. Then I read, I was living in the UK, that 500,000 men a year are known to view these images that they know of. And there's a kind of triage in the policing system to go for what is worse. So I was thinking, I mean, I'm very interested in technology and how it shapes the imagination and this kind of shift over to all the worse and worse and worse things. So, but I was not interested in the supposed glamour and heroism of the criminals. I was very interested in a woman who's fallen, who loves a man. That's the crisis in the book. Cora has loved a man who's accused of what is the worst crime in our era. And we all know that the messages from the head do not get to the heart when the heart is in love. So what do you do when you have that
Conflict.
split? You know, that split of the feeling and then suddenly finding out about somebody in her own sort of background. So I wanted to go into the murkiest and most shark-infested waters and see what happened.
It's very interesting because, I mean, there's a lot of interest nowadays, I'm sure in popular culture, about the wife of the serial killer, about the daughter of the murderer or the criminal kind of thing. But they've always been there. They've always been people who have almost like struggled with, how did I come from here? If I was a daughter or a son, for instance,
Yes.
you know, I mean, one would wonder what if Hannibal Lecter had a child, you know,
With Clarice Starr.
Are you Clarice Starr?
Who of you knows what the people you live with do when they leave the house? Do they go to work, or do they go and like machete people to death? How would you know? How would you know? And I mean
You
that's
scare me.
I mean we all wonder that
Yeah.
sometimes, you know, so it's like that person who's got, I mean,
So your worst fears is not that the person is having an affair. That's very interesting, eh? Your worst fears is not that the person is having an affair in the modern age. Your worst fears is that the person is macheting people, you know, or the
yeah, that's it. I haven't actually. I just thought of that now this minute.
but now I'm thinking about it, and we're going to delve deeper into it. You're not going to get away so easily. But the truth of the matter is that from a modern crime era,
Yeah.
you know, I'll give us an example. One of my dearest friends, we're all talking about, you know, committed partners having affairs, and she said, and it was like, no, then he slept with another woman, and the other, and it's my friend, very mature friend, goes, is that the worst thing? No, I divorced my husband because I knew that he was emotionally involved with another woman, but I know that they were never intimate. I could sense that they were never intimate, but I knew that he was emotionally invested. Because they were calling themselves in the middle of the night, they were texting in the middle of the night, and I knew this is beyond an affair.
I hate being woken up by text in the middle of the night.
Okay, so but
They know affairs. I think that thing of that we're closest to the you know, we never know what secrets people are. That was not my main focusing. I was very interested with Freya, the daughter, Cora, who you meet at the beginning, her daughter. Because she's been loved by her mother and well
and the
built up.
father too.
Yeah, the father too, but it's the dyad between mother and daughter I was very interested. But she senses that her mother has carried things that she is split off from, disassociated from. And it's interesting to me what you do if you are the child of somebody who's high functioning now but carries wounds from their own childhood or an addiction that they've got rid of. And the child will, because she's always watching her mother, you know, she's sitting there watching the girl. She's kind of, and I haven't done that intentionally. I think, yes, there's a little girl very aware that not everything is okay.
Well.
She senses what her mother can't, you know, the kind of unconscious of her mother. And is always kind of watching her, keeping an eye, so she can't be free. This little girl, well, she's not little, she's 18, 19. She
19 now.
Yeah. She can't be free, but it was the focus that I had was to go right in the psyche. And I don't know if any of you here have been reading a totally not a crime writer, a woman called Elizabeth Strout, Olive Kitteridge, and My Name is Lucy Barton, and oh, so amazing. So you go into the psyches of other people. Elizabeth Strout does this. I've only read her after I finished this book, but in a way I recognized something that I was tempting to do, was where you go into the psychic realm of a person without judgment. It's not about whether they're doing the right, you just find out the terrain of that person's mind.
I know, I think the first time that I was like, okay, Maggie, what are you doing here? Because in crime fiction, the worst thing you can do is not to kill a human being. But you never ever kill a dog or a cat. And you never ever abandon a dog or a cat in the snow. And this happened in the first 10 pages. I was like, okay, I don't like this woman.
I've heard so many letters from people. How could you do that to the dog? I can't.
Yeah.
The dog.
But, I mean, the dog was fine at the end of this, spoiler alert. But the point, I think I want to go back to that issue of this whole idea of we don't know what our loved ones are doing when they're with us. I think it's such a wonderful conversation to have.
Your wife is here. We could ask.
She worries. but seriously, I think it's something that we all wonder about. You know, we know that at work, yes, they are at work, but are they really at work? What is on their internet? What are they? You know, I mean, I'm a crime writer. And we always joke that if you ever check the browser history of a writer, so it's like, how do you get rid of a body? How do you dissolve the bones? You know, how do you kind of thing? You know, so I wonder that if, for us as writers, when we go into the minds of, okay, say the perpetrator, you know, what do we see? You know, does it scare us, or does it reinforce a certain belief about humanity that you never quite know the people that you love?
The key for me with perpetrators, what I've done, nobody believes a total devil unless you're watching a cartoon. And I've not ever, and I've spent a lot of time with very damaged, very criminal people when I was working in South Africa. I worked in prisons, and I worked a lot with gangs, and I worked with police, and I never, ever, I don't believe in pure evil. I don't believe in evil. I think it's, I've met people I think who are damaged beyond repair, and who are better kept in prison because they're too broken and they're too dangerous. But I never met a single person where I could not find in me a response to the humanity of that. No, not compassion, a recognition of me and them and me. I've never met one person who's done anything and I haven't been able to imagine myself into that position and doing it. So for me, the creation of what's really frightening about evil people in books is that they were once children and terrible things happened to them and they've done this. I mean, some people do terrible things, we don't know why, but they are just as human as we are, as I am. Maybe. That's what I've always felt, is that sort of recognition. So that's what I look for. Also what I look for, what I've learned with people, is that there is a point, people will step over a boundary and then they can't go back.
Mm.
There's things you do which you can't go back, and there's a tremendous will to power and a pleasure in cruelty and dominance. In most of us repress that. Not one of us has not hit our younger siblings, I don't think, when we were small, when we could, and our mom was. Is there anyone here? Or was not hit by someone you weren't there? Yeah. So that feeling that comes up in a little kid, we all know that, which we. So that's the place I go to. That thing of, but then there are people who give over to that will to power over others, and that is the real cruelty to me, when you actually know what you might forget that you knew what you were doing, but they know. And there's something about the technology of like visual dominance that we have in our culture, the way women are represented, the way people bully will look at you until you look away, and the sort of shame that comes into that experience of shame. My other theory about cruelty and men and women who are people who are cruel and who hurt others, it always struck me when I was working with survivors of all sorts of violence. Sexual violence is the obvious one, but often people who are mugged or attacked, this terrible feeling of shame. How do they feel shame? Because the shameful act was done to them by somebody else. And they know that, okay, there's an economy of shame. It's got to go somewhere. So people who are unable to integrate shame, which is our way of reading our vulnerability or the fact that other people can hurt us, they insert it into somebody who they've momentarily or over long term got power over. And that poor person is like their VHS player. And I'll explain to you why I use a VHS. They play the tape of the other person's shame, so they could be shameless. And I remember this rape survivor, and she says, I can't bear it. It goes, oh yeah, I feel so sick. And I told her this feeling I have, this idea I have about this economy of shame. I said, it's a tape. You're playing his tape. Push it out. And all of you who over 30, or remember the VHS machine, you put it in your favorite movie and whoops, it would come out. And you'd like carefully push it in, out. You'd like club it in, out. And so there was something that helped me to understand what is possible. So you don't get rid of the thing, you just think, I'm not playing your shame movie anymore. And then you just, because I think that was one of the most evil things, the VHS machine that. Remember that feeling? You get this happy tingle in your fingers, and you're going to watch this movie you've been waiting, and it goes in, and there's that satisfying click, and you're just about to relax, and out it comes. So that was like a total.
Okay, I never thought of this VHS. But I think that is very interesting analogy, and what I would like to sort of talk about is how do you, as a writer, walk through that? I understand. I've never thought about it. I thought about it from a point of view that psychologically, for me, I would call it the economy of control. Because if I'm able to control my shame, and that's what makes us powerful, right? This shame comes over me, but I'm able to control it, and I'm not using it to hurt others. I've been hurt before, but I'm not going to bleed on others, kind of thing. And so that gives us a weird sense of control, right? Because it makes us say, I'm not going to let my shame determine my next behavior, the way I deal with other people. But what I'm interested in, from a writer's point of view, is that how do you come away whole? How do you come away healed? How do you come away going back to write another Claire Hart novel or another story about, hopefully, Angel?
I don't think you do. I think you change. You change and you become a different person because you understand things in a different way. I mean, the character I started off most interested in is Cora, who's this artist who does all these paintings to try and process her South African childhood and all sorts of different things. but the person who stayed with me is Angel, this avenging. I do apologize.
Angel.
Yeah, I so apologize for my absolutely corny and embarrassingly medieval comic strip name selection. Someone said to me, "Why Claire Hart?" Claire Hart. And he's a very good writer, Anthony Alfred. He said, "Mom, please write a book where everyone has normal names like Bob Smith."
Or Tangeni.
Tangeni avocado.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, all my books have had a question which I couldn't answer at the beginning, and then I get to the end and I have an answer. Then I have to that question, and then I have a new question. So my question with Angel, who's so full of rage and vengeance and so creative, and I love her. I love her. She's like this wild, androgynous creature, completely not. She's fabulous. But I was thinking that I've got 2 books planned to follow up. And they're both, I can't remember the titles now, but somehow ingeniously I managed to keep the word I in both of them. I can't remember the titles. But my question was really, how do people get over? Is it possible? There's some people who will actually spend their lives molded in the shape of somebody who harmed them. It is because in a way she's the most caught, even though she seems the most free. She's the most determined by what's happened to her, what's been done to her. So I don't know the answer.
But do you think that you're using Angel to heal?
You're very worried about this healing.
Yeah, I think so.
Are you worried about me, Femi?
I am. I've finished it. I've read it twice. And all outline.
It's nice to be worried about it. No, seriously, it is. Yes, I think I would use Angel to heal because I've had a 25-year question and I'm only starting to read it now. Is that how do people take back the imaginative practice of it and become in the center of their lives, even if something really terrible things have happened? And I'm not an optimistic person, so I don't know if it's possible. I think there's some people who just need to live alongside what happens to them. And how does that work? And how does this brilliant girl direct this fire and this she's to me she's like this real spirit creature in a way, ruthless and like able to communicate with, she gets on so well with animals and little children who are creatures without judgment. So I don't know. I don't know what she can't end up doing arts and crafts. So one of the things I thought she would absolutely do something creative, and just every now and then there'd be somebody bad enough that
she would go after. She does remind me of the Millennial Trilogy.
Yes, the
Golden Dragon. Does remember.
I love that trilogy. I think where she's different, that Stig Larsson character, what's it, Elizabeth Salander?
Yes.
She is really, I loved her character and what she did, but she stays the same and she gets colder and harder and colder and harder. And this girl
grows and evolves.
She grows and she absolutely loved her. She and her mother lived together quite an isolation. She loses her mother that crucial at 11 and was killed in a car accident actually. It's not her spoiler, it's just her backstory.
It's just fact.
And she, in a way, I was curious about this motherless girl. And I was thinking, if we live in a patriarchal culture where culture is handed on, sort of from man to man, what is it like to be a woman in a non-matriarchal culture? Like, who hands on to girls how to be? I don't know, that was floating around in my mind as well. So Angel is, and she's attracted, she kind of tries to get alongside to maternal figures somehow, even if they can't, but hardcore like Cora. She's looking for this matriarchal line in a culture, or so am I guess. And I suppose I've sort of been trying to figure it out. Anyway, that's all I kind of got.
No, I mean, I've read Daddy's Girl and, like I said, it was textbook, but I don't think you could have written a book like this 15 years ago.
No.
Right? There's so much
No,
wisdom inside it. You know? There's so much wisdom inside it, and I outlined one or two places. But one of my favorite places was when we were talking about how trauma was being processed, and I actually but I actually just put a line there, and I said, okay, I really wanted, I think. He said something, he said, when I started, I believed that if I spent enough time in the presence of evil, I could absorb it, disperse it, stop the pain by making beauty out of the shattered remnants. I was wrong. There's no healing, and there's no end to the pain. It just has to be endured. I thought that was very
So
scary.
that's the autobiographical section.
Yeah. Especially when you're talking about the whole idea of you don't heal from it, you walk alongside it. It's parallel in a sense, And I was wondering, is that not pessimistic? Especially if I was practicing therapist, I would be like, no, don't spoil my business. Or is that the best we can hope for? The best we can hope for is that we walk alongside it and we walk parallel to the trauma?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Cora is very interesting to me because she's a gifted artist and she's successful. She does do some sort of like processing and thinking. I suppose as a writer what really touched me, I thought what I wrote down there, and then since this book has come out, I've had three, precisely three. Women who've come to me and said, I read this book and you absolutely, the one woman said it to me about Cora and her daughter Freya. And I hadn't thought of it particularly much, and she said, my mother was a very damaged woman, and she put it aside, and she said, you described my feeling in relation to my mom, who actually had mothered her as best she could. And she said, she's like 60 years old, she said, you put into words what I've lived with my whole life, like living with someone who's just holding herself together like shards of glass. And she said that released something in me, and I thought, okay, maybe, I mean, I never thought of writing as a public service. But I thought, good, I'm glad of it. Another woman, she'd been involved with someone she was gaslit. It's a lot about gaslighting, being someone who she feels there's something off, and it's just, he makes her mad. And then she read this book and she said to me, at last you got what you described what it like to be driven mad by somebody who is telling you that they're telling the truth and they lie. It's not about infidelity, but there's something about this man who's at the center of the book is Eve. She's two. Anyway, he's out of focus all the time. So anyway, so I did do a public service, and then I felt, how did I feel about that? I felt, I was surprised. Because you never think when you write with the people who read your book. It's like weird to me, you write this book and you serve by yourself in the room, and then they read it and you think, oh, embarrassing. I believe that. How did it get out?
So my book was released during the COVID era, and so I didn't have a relationship with the readers. So I did the most masochistic thing you could ever do. I wrote to book. How was it?
Goodreads.
Goodreads, yes. So I go to Goodreads.
Do you just want a hammer? And
I know. So I would go to Goodreads every morning just to see what people thought about my book. And the one that helped me the most was that the lead character is a misogynist, and we don't like how he views women. And I'm like, so the author must therefore be a misogynist in a sense. And I was like, have you met my wife? Have you met my mom? Kind of thing. So I think where I'm going.
He's wrong about your book. That's not true.
Well, it's not. But the idea that the fact that an author put certain characteristics in a character, that means that the author is. I mean, I would hate to think that Thomas Harris is some secret Hannibal Lecter running around the US kind of thing, you know. But there's something so literal about the idea that every character in our stories is a piece of us, and they are. But I don't know why.
It's usually stolen.
Yes, exactly. And people just, why people tend to think the worst is the one of the worst of us is the one that we put out there, kind of thing. So what I wanted to ask is, and I know that the guys around here really want to ask this question: are men bastards?
No, I inadvertently got married a couple of months ago, so much to my shock. Yes.
So you didn't plan it?
I did plan it. My daughter said it was like wild chaos that just came together.
The perfect storm.
Yeah. No, I don't think so. I think that, I mean, you asked earlier about like the Ghislaine Maxwell and stuff like that. I do not think that, I don't believe that there's like a difference between the inner minds or the hearts of men and women. I think that you can have my second year university feminist politics lecture. Very condensed. I think that power enables certain forms of dominance. So if you live in a society that's dominated by men, there are a lot of men who think they have their jobs because they are wonderful and marvelous, rather than that's how
the society
society works. But I think that there's something very difficult about power and something very complex about masculinity. So what is it that drives the 500,000 men that they know about in England to look at pictures of people suffering? Because I hate to break this news, but girls and women and little boys are people. There's something deeply inadequate in these people, and it's often you get this hyper-masculinity, so it's all very hard and then this thing about integrating shame rather than control, vulnerability goes off to seeing somebody else suffer. So I think that's, and you get collusion. I mean, women can be unbelievably cruel. That's why motherhood is so interesting to write about. I think that a lot of one of the things under a sort of hyper-masculine society or patriarchal culture is that it's impossible for a man to integrate his vulnerability. So it has to be pretended it's not there all the time. Who was he most dependent on? Of course, when he was born and all the way through, his mother. So each one of us know that we're completely dependent. I mean, the only reason any of us are alive now, our mothers didn't kill us. They gave birth, and then they didn't drown us or starve us, or you know what I mean. So that immense power is really an interesting, and I remind my children that.
This is a very lovely quote that I had. It just said something. Half the world's population is women, but all the world's population was created by women.
So watch it.
I thought it was very, very fascinating. But you still haven't answered my question.
Which one?
Which is that about men? Guys, do I speak for you? Because I'm trying to find a guy in this story that I'm proud of. That
that nice one.
Tommy, right? Yeah, but he was just so backgroundish, you know.
I'll bring him into the foreground.
Yeah, yes. You know, but I just want to know: are more of us evil or controlled by the patriarchal society than some of us that have actually maybe embraced it and say, okay, you know what? You know, because when I think about the men in my life, we recognize that we have very powerful women around us, and we almost take the passive-aggressive stance. You know, we take a step back and say, okay, you know what? I don't even have an opinion, so I'm going to read the newspapers. I'm going to watch CNN, kind of thing. So, but very few of us. Yes, there are 500,000 women, men that watch this kind of thing. But I still think they're just so. I mean, I think of my dad. You know, I think about so many, and I don't think that enough literature, especially in the post-feminist era, pay homage to good dads. You know, something for the good dads here.
I'll put it on your dad.
Yeah, great dads.
What's his name, your dad?
No, but seriously, let's think about it. You know, when last did we hear about a wholesome male character in crime fiction that is an
Harry
example?
Potter.
Exactly. From science fiction or from fantasy. So Harry Potter is a fantasy.
We all know good people are not interesting.
Yeah.
So all they probably bazillions of good men who just never make it into the books.
Yeah.
So that is part. I mean, I have got the solution to sexual violence because I was reading statistical things, and 95% are committed by men. We can immediately end it tomorrow if all those men who commit sexual crimes stopped. It would be over. So I would say to them, just stop.
But wouldn't it be more interesting?
That's a short book.
No, no, but wouldn't it be more interesting, for instance, just occurred to me now, that a rape crisis counselor was male?
Let's not go into that conversation.
No, but I'm just
I mean,
asking.
for male survivors of sexual assault, there are counselors, but for a woman who's been through an assault,
She won't talk to a man.
No. Not, I mean, it would be just too traumatic. Straight in the arms. But should we open?
Yes.
Should we open?
Now it's time now. But thank you so much. I really enjoyed having the conversation with you. It wasn't an interview, like you said. So, guys, let's open it now. Some of us that have read the book, this is my favorite read of the year. I really enjoyed it. It was very immersive. One of the things that I really loved about it was giving context to character. You know, it's something I'm very, very passionate about nowadays. Not characters just doing things, but actually understanding where they're coming from. So I actually found this a very South African, story in a sense. And because of where that lead character, Cora, was coming from. So but we'll talk about it more later. But now talking about being in Southern Africa and everybody's around here, for some of you that have read the book and some of you that have read some of Maggie's old books, what do you have to ask?
Not for donations. You can ask anything.
It can be about Claire Hart. I love Claire.
What I found very interesting was someone in society annoyed us, and particularly cheated my daughter. When she put them in the book and killed them.
I did.
Yeah.
I did as a service to a number of people. And one of the things I like, some people would die like in like a phrase, like comma, he died. And then other people would get like a sentence or a paragraph, and some people needed like several pages.
of pain.
Yeah, and it's very cathartic. And then people would start telling me like, can you, there's this person, they did me this wrong. And then I'd say to them, okay, what would be the worst place, worst way, most humiliating? And then I would do it, and then I'd tell them, and I'd say, okay, it's on page whatever of this book.
Go there.
Yes, because I realized that, okay, maybe that is a services writing, because every time you get upset with how you were wronged by this evildoer, you can go and read it, and you over and over and over get the satisfaction of the punishment and painful and humiliating deceasement of that person, and you never, and you just go on with your life, and then you kind of...
You scare me.
Yeah.
Moving swiftly on, as it were,
Yes.
Margie, has it ever been a temptation to write in another genre?
Well, I had not yet. I mean, I sort of I'm writing a memoir at the moment. Again, not a lot has happened in my life. I've written so many crime novels that the pace is like, and I'm thinking, no, my life was not at all like that. My life is just like sort of meandered along. So I think now the genre has infected the other stuff. But what I'm interested, this is not really, I mean, it's not really crime, it's not at all procedural. It's a real, like, exploration of psychic things. But I love a story, if you know what I mean, and the sort of, I've always been interested in which I suppose why I wrote crime fiction to start with, is what the before and after. You know, so something shocking, and it can be a wonderful thing. It's like you can have a love story. I did write a romance and everybody died by page 4 because I couldn't, there's no reason for them to be alive. Because, like in a crime novel, crime novel, someone has to survive so you can get to the truth that the romance was bad. But it's like in that before and after moment. So when it happens, you still know the self that you were, but then the new self you are, especially if it's a traumatic thing, you get further and further away, like continental drift, until you've got like Brazil over there and West Africa here, and you could see where they once fitted. So it's that, like in a Shakespearean tragedy, it's the second act. First act is like the build up, second act is bam, what happens, and the third is either like courtroom or hangings or marriage. You know, those are the two options. Or happy ever after, or everybody dies. Like that. So it's in that moment, and it's like often in that moment where you have like a revelation of character. So in this one, in the series, which hopefully will come, it's about what to me is more interesting, because for a long time I thought the justice system can get things better. It can solve things. It doesn't. It deals with a number of issues. I'm not saying we shouldn't send people to jail, but people still have to.
A bit too black and white.
Yeah, they still have the thing, whatever had happened, and they've become a different person unwillingly. Like I unwillingly became a different person because of the death of Nelly. I'm a different person, but. And the person I was when she was still, so it's that, and so many of us have experiences like that, you know. So it's a way of magnifying it. Yeah.
I think for me is that the allure of crime fiction is always about the fact that I think all literature is about crimes, in a way, crimes of the heart, you know, transgression, crime and punishment kind of thing. So I've never quite thought of myself as writing crime fiction. I'm just writing a story that has a conflict and somebody did something wrong to the other person and it just happens to be against the law, you know, kind of thing. You know, but in a sense, I think that's really what I love about this book, because it's not about, like you said, it's not about procedural and all of that. It's about actually sins against the heart, you know, in a sense. And I think the law does not have justice for that. And that's why I really like the fact that
there's no solace.
There's no solace, exactly. And so the person takes the matter into their hands to find their own emotional peace, in a sense.
You're going to join up with Angel.
Good. Yeah. Thanks, man.
Thank you very much. I thought it was a wonderful presentation and the conversation is very, very fascinating. I've always been very interested in crime fiction. In fact, I teach crime fiction to my students at the master's level. And I start with Sherlock Holmes and Agatha Christie. You know, there's a template that we follow. Of course, I'm more interested in the new crime fiction that people write and people read now, because you bring in other elements also. It's not just the crime. So my question to you pertains to that. When you're writing crime fiction, do you start with a plot? Do you plot heavily? Or do you just write and you let the characters grow and evolve and the crime happens?
I write.
Addressed to both of you.
I have one, in all the books I've written, I've had one, like when I storyboard it. I storyboard a scenario of a disparity of power, which I don't understand. So in a way, it's like the kernel experience around which is, and then I kind of, it's like a little grit in the oyster of my mind, and then I pull these things out. And I asked myself simply, and this is sort of writing technique, this thing has happened, and this thing will come into my mind from wherever it is, like the girl I'd interviewed who stayed with me for 25 years. The book I set in Walvis Bay, which I was doing, sort of Marlene was teaching there. I was working on a film then. There was a murder or something, and it just was, nothing was resolved. And this little boy, this kid, stayed with me. I thought I have to tell your story, if you know what I mean. It's like, record you somehow. And then I say to myself, what happens next? What happened just before? What happens next? What happened just before? And then I like,
Expanded.
yeah, and then it expands like that. And what brought these two people, if it is two, into this place at this time? What have they brought with them? So it's quite organic. And then I write the end. So that I know, so that I'm not just rolling around the back of a bucket. Yeah, so I know where I'm going. But, and I do know there's some people like Jeffrey Deaver, who's got like the weirdest, he's got like these swoop of wrinkles on one side. I interviewed him once, and I was so distracted by his face, it was difficult. But he plots everything out. And like Ian Rankin, who I know well, Rebus, he tells me he doesn't. So he's driven by this wonderful character, John Rebus, what happens to John Rebus. And I was lucky enough to interview Ian Rankin in Edinburgh a couple of years ago for 30 years. So I reread all the books from his very first one to the thing. And I must say, I thought it was like a rock star, because it was just like thousands of people who'd come to see Ian. But so in his books, the crime is sort of incidental. You know, he's always like, you know, there's a murder here, and this and that, and it's Edinburgh, it's very thing. But I thought, my God, what this man, just genius man, has done inadvertently is write a portrait of changing masculinity in Scotland and policing from this late 70s to now. And that's because crime fiction is involved with the minutiae of the everyday. I always think of a history with a small h, you know, and the texture of the real. You capture, you have to capture the texture of life of ordinary people. And what was brilliant, someone brought up Elizabeth Solander, so what was that? Stieg Larsson. He and other Scandinavian writers in the 90s, because you're always looking in the corner of your eye for what's over there, were writing about the far right, who are now in the Swedish government. I mean, who would have thought that neo-Nazis, which the crime writers were feeling, would now be the power brokers of Sweden, of all places, and of Belgium and all of them.
I think, but that's a very interesting thing. I'll come back to you, Mark. But I think different writers approach plotting in different ways. You know, I need, for instance, to know exactly the crime and how the crime was committed, and I work within the context of why done it, not who done it. So context is very important for me. So different writers have different ways of approaching it. But for us, especially on the continent, because crime fiction is not that vibrant, what we have learned is to try and tell our stories in a way that can appeal to a broader audience. And so we have learned to sort of create that context to understand. So that was one of the things that where I liked the Eye of the Beholder, because I could understand where Cora was coming from and the context for where she was coming from, because I lived that reality on a daily basis. Thank you so much. So, ma'am?
Yeah, this is you talked about Rebus and Ian Rankin. I remember him, at one point he was talking about Rebus as if it was a monster that he had created, that he'd handed out to the general public, and the general public had embraced and said, we want more. And so Rebus now has Rankin in kind of a stranglehold.
Yes, a vice grip.
And from time to time, he has tried to put him down. And there is so much clamour of, no, and he retired him. Yeah, the man has now a terminal disease. And people
he'll never get rid of him. No, I know. And then everybody knows where.
Have you had that experience?
I have a bit. Everyone always says to me, where's Claire Hunt? Where is she going to come back? And she had a baby, and I did try. She had a baby, and then she was doing like chasing gangs with like a 3-month-old baby, and it's really difficult to breastfeed and to but now that little kid is 8, so I was thinking, how can I? Has she moved to London, Claire? does she leave her kid to be babysat by this really nice lady called Margie Orford? So she could go and be Angel's therapist, partner, God, I don't know, but this evil little kid that Claire had at the end of the last one. So it does happen like that, and then people do. I mean, it's very interesting. People get very invested in characters, but I think Rebus worked so brilliantly because he's so real, and he creates this whole like thing of Scotland around him, and he's reflected how policing and how men of a certain type have had to change it. Because Rebus is really, those of you who know Ian Rankin's book, he really is not a misogynist at all.
No.
He's a very interesting character because he's kind of macho and always drunk and doesn't do the washing up, and he's got this sort of trappings of it. But from the earliest books, and you can go and see it, in the earliest books he's a fair-minded, good-hearted
He used to
person.
be a jazz aficionado, I think. He gave up jazz somewhere in his young years. Exactly.
But he will outlive Ian Rankin.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah,
Poor
no,
Ian.
yeah.
Well, Elizabeth Salander outlived Stig Larsson.
Yeah,
Well,
well,
she might have
we all did.
And if I can, forgive me, Benny Griesel.
Oh, I love
yes.
Femi Kayode.
You know, similar
Dion
sort
Mayer's
of
Benny.
policeman who's often drunk and, you know,
Yes.
but a good human being. So there are good men in literature. Rebus and Benny Griesel.
No, absolutely. I think when we think about it, the most
And in
popular
real
one
life, sorry. And in
And
real
in
life.
real life.
And in real life.
yes,
Yeah.
the most popular one, come on, guys, 007. Yeah, I know it sounds very pop and cliched, but the reality of the matter is that people like Ian Rankin have created a brand that is bigger, and a lot of people can buy into it, and that's what makes a brand so attractive, because it's bigger than the person, and it's just so much larger, and that's why you say that it will live longer, because it's actually the spirit of Rebus as against the person of Rebus, everything that he embodies that we want to be like, the chivalry, even the flaws are so human and so real and so relatable that we actually just want to be that person. I mean, I always say about Rebus, then it's like, I want to be like that when I grow up. Good. Anyway, other question?
I learned something today.
Yeah.
Rosie got the book, she read it a bit, and she said, I can't read this book, and read it backwards. And then Margie says she wrote it backwards. Coincidence, the moment that comes out.
Yes. I don't know whether I'm being gender-based right now, but I don't know how to write a book backwards. But I can read it backwards. I understand. I always go to the end of the
I
book.
didn't like the whole thing backwards, I just wrote the end.
You knew the end, and then you walked backwards.
I'm very proud of the end.
I really love the ending.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so we have somebody over there.
Yeah, she wants to.
And then, yes, ma'am?
Ask a question. What do you think I'm going to ask?
Yes, ma'am?
Thanks. Margie, I'm curious, how do you land up balancing, you've got your writing time, creating such a novel, and you said in the past you used to be an investigative journalist. How do you look at balancing, different aspects of your life? Do you lock yourself in your room for months on end and only write, or do you have a...
I used to tie myself onto my chair with my dressing gown so that I didn't escape and go in my garden. I'm not very interested in balance. I think it's very overrated. Like perseverance, I also think is very overrated virtue. I think if you're doing something that's not good, stop it. If you're doing something, you're doing a good thing if you can't stop. So I find what happens is I would get more and more and more obsessed and work longer and longer hours and wake up in the middle of the night and write it. So it inhabits your whole self. And then I'm cast aside by the book when it's finished and I have nothing to do and I'm utterly useless and so I don't try and do balance.
So the question should be to our family members. We dedicate all our books to everybody that has suffered through this cycle. And on that note, I'm going to pass it on. Neka, you had your hand up?
Oh, yes. So I can't take this picture out of my mind of you knowing where you want to get to the end.
Yes.
And trying to figure out how to get your characters from the point where they are to that end, to reach that end that you want. So if I was a fly on your wall, I just want to be sure that I have the right picture in my mind. So I see you like biting your fingers out, trying to figure out how this character gets from this point to
You are married to a writer.
point.
I have no idea how to do it, and then slowly, millimeter by millimeter, like what did they do next? What did they do next? What did they do next? It comes to me, and then I write backwards a bit, and sometimes it's just. I have to change the place where I start. I never change the place where I end, but I do change the place where I start sometimes, and I think, okay, I just started in the wrong place. And I do remember a joke my dad always used to say about somebody who stopped an Irishman in Ireland to ask directions, and he said, how do I get to, and he said, he looked this way up the road and that way up the road, and he said, well, if I was going there, I wouldn't start from here. It's a very helpful tip with writing, because sometimes you find where you begin is actually the middle. And so I move everything about. But in all the books I've written in the end, because I do have the feeling, I have wanted the feeling that my characters, and especially the people who suffer, there will be a form of justice and a form of comfort for the reader. I've been very interested in this word solace, like what is it? So that the reader that you will take them through the darkness back somewhere, which it might not quite be Lightseekers, but that it will be satisfying for the reader. And that, because the crime fiction is like fairy stories for grown-ups. Like if you read your kid a story that said, once upon a time it was a dark and stormy night and there was a dragon that was like eating up princesses, and you read them a book that it was still a dark and stormy night and all the princesses were still your child would shun you. You know, you have to, so for me it's that arc of thing where you have a story and it's frightening, but then you have the containment and the like, that was okay. Because life is not like that, but fiction is.
But I think what's so exciting for me, and I think this is what makes Margie Orford the queen of crime fiction. Not the queen of African or South African crime fiction, but the queen of crime fiction is that she has managed to spearhead a culture of not glorifying the crime, but actually honoring the victims. And that she has constantly done through all your books. You have always honored the victims, and you've always cared about the victims. It was never this, anonymous blonde girl that was found in the woods and things like that, but you have always humanized the victims so that we could feel for them, so that when that justice comes, it's satisfying. And I think that's actually the secret. I think I just stumbled on it. Because
very complimentary.
the fact that we journeyed with the victim for so long, so that when the justice or the solace comes, we're like, yes, finally. As against when we glorify the crime and it's the devil that's with all the bells and the whistles, and then it finally is over and you're like, okay, yeah, I expected that. Kind of thing, move on. So thank you so much for really, really giving victims of trauma, victims of crimes, a face. They're not just a number, they're not just characters that you move around at the chess piece, but they're really real three-dimensional people that have context and they have culture around them. So thank you so much for that. We will take 2 more questions, and then...
I just need a glass of wine.
Yeah, we're going to get that. Glass of wine for the writer, please.
I think
for the author, by the way.
My brain is about to die, yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Just as a matter of interest, if you say you write your endings first, how often do you change the ending once you've done the rest of the story?
How often do I change it? And actually, I will tone and distill, but it is. Do you know, like if you throw a grappling hook, or if you go, it's like it goes and it must hold there because it's such a long process to write a book, or such a on good slopes. So it takes time and it takes an enormous amount of effort and faith, and it's like somehow I've got my like imbalance of power. These terrible, that girl who I've thought in my mind for 20 years, I had her in my mind, but it never stops. And then I thought that that's going to be the ending. It's going to stop for her somehow. And so I don't change it. It comes to me almost like a vision or hallucination somehow. And then that doesn't shift, but I have no idea how to get there. Like I've got the ending of the next book, and I have no idea how I'm going to pull it off. None, but I have to.
So you don't use the grappling hook at the very expensive school, so you escape at night.
It's true. We went through the chapel window.
Thank you. Next question, ma'am.
Mine is sort of similar. It's more sort of about how do you do this writing thing. Do you ever find that you've created a really beautiful passage? You read it back to yourself and go, oh, cool, that's good. Oh, I'm good. And then you're kind of looking for where to put it, and you're going through your book and you're like, oh, it doesn't know, you put there. And in the end you sort of, oh, it's not going to work.
No, your editor does that too. I've always had those passages, phrases, beautiful, it's like Wordsworthian.
Yeah, you don't have to phone somebody up to tell them this is so good.
Yeah, and then you get it, and there's like your editor
has done away with it.
Well, they murder your darling, but it's interesting with it, like those bits, those like vanity bits.
Kill your darlings.
You just kill them, and then you mourn for them, and you weep, and then you realize how actually, after you've done it, how evil and that they've been sent to you by other writers. There's this darling that's gone around the world, and like that was your turn with that one. And they're like zombie darlings, and they will go off to other people, and then you're so happy, and then they come up in the next book, and it's the purpleness of the prose, and then the shade, the gratitude you feel for your editor that she saved you. You know that feeling? Did everyone have this nightmare that I had of going to school in grade 1 with either your pajama rookies on or no pants?
Yeah.
I don't know why that. And it's like
security dream.
I don't know. It's terrible, and I would be convinced that would have. So it's the equivalent. It's the writing equivalent to going to school in grade 1 with your books. And so your editor always, like your mum, always says, "Have you got your books on there?" Yes. And your editor says, "Have you murdered that darlings?" Yes.
Can I ask something?
Yeah.
Margie, I don't know if the audience realise how versatile you are and your whole background. Because I'm thinking of Margie as an academic, as a lecturer at the university, as working with Jane Kachavivi and Namibia Books, as an editor, and doing things at Parliament, you're very, very versatile. Obviously, all that experience has come into your writing. But you were talking about being edited out, but you've edited out. When you worked with Jane at that time, you were editing new Namibian writers.
Yeah.
Can you say how that has affected you?
Yes, I can. Briefly, because I'm sure everyone needs a drink now. So I'm sure all of you know or knew or know of Jane Kachavivi. And I totally love Jane, and she set me on my path. And I have to tell you a little story. So I'd had my second baby, and I didn't murder her or do anything evil to her. But I was very trapped at home, and it didn't suit me. And I saw this little and like tiny semi-new semi-advert. New Namibia Books, Jane Kachavivi started this thing. I got in the car and I drove across town from academia where I did to the Jane's with New Namibia Books, and I went in there and I said, "You don't know me, but I know you. I've read about this thing, and you have to give me a job. I'm going completely mad at home, and you have to give me a job." She said, "But I'm not advertising." I said, "You have to give me a job, or I will go mad." And she gave me a job. She made me a commissioning editor, and she saved my life. I have to say, and this is like mentoring. She just No, they were never Christmas. But yes, maybe the shadow mother. But and then it was a really fascinating time, and it was something about writing and justice. Because South Africa had the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, in which, for all its flaws, it allowed narratives to be held publicly and said, and you could say this or whatever, but it was profound experience. And in fact, the only TRC, or the first TRC, where perpetrators and victims were in the same room and had to hear each other. There's something very powerful about that. So I worked with Jane, and there was no TRC, as you know, in Namibia. And so much of the civil war, the wounding, the damage, and the shattering, really, that happened and the remaking was kind of went away. And it made sense, you know, the people got in their bedfords and drove away, but the wounds were there. You could feel them in people and around. So we started publishing books like Ellen Amila's book, Jackson Kanyewa. There was sort of biographies with people, and I remember working with people. And I was a baby. I was like 20. I didn't know anything. I was 27 or 28, but I had this sense that what I was reading was not the whole story. Like I remember saying to Ellen, she was in Kasinga, Ellen Amila, and then she was here, and I said, but what happened? Because Kasinga was like the biggest battle, and poor Ellen, she wrote it, and her writing about the Battle of Kasinga is astonishing. She was only 15. So seeing this way in which writing, people could find their stories. So people would write to me in the Namibia books and say, we found ourselves, we could feel ourselves in this. But the most touching one was no, hers was the Purple Flowers of Ashanti. That was wonderful. But a soldier, I think his name was Feinstein.
Anthony Feinstein.
So he'd served, he'd done his training, and then he served in the military in the north. And so we had the launch for it, and I had, who's the guy who set up he was a poet who set up sort of one of the first breakaway parties from Swartha. His name will come to me in there. And I wrote to him and I said, would you launch Anthony's book? Ben
Ulenga.
Yeah, I think it was Ben Ulenga. And he didn't answer me, and he didn't answer me, and I thought, okay, I'll just do the launch. And then Ben came, and this Feinstein, Anthony was there, and there was suddenly this electricity. There was this plan fighter and this SADF conscript, and he describes this horrific kind of massacre that he'd been, this kind of shooting up in the village. And there was just this electricity. It was really, I can feel it again in my skin. It was like these two men standing there, and Ben said to him, you're the only one who came back. It was so moving, and I thought, because he had written the book and he'd been involved in all these, this kind of army things, it was terrible, but he said you had the courage to come back. And I was profoundly shaped by that experience of what can happen with narrative. Yes, that, but also that you can tell stories. And these early Namibian writers were, because there was no TLC, they were recording. They're the only people who recorded for our generation and for the people who followed what it felt like in the body, somatically in the body, in the heart, not the sociology of it or the history of it. And it had a profound effect on me. That, and it doesn't unhappen the past, it doesn't fix anything, but it was like that thing of honoring the victims. Their story is told, it so quickly gets disappeared. But thanks for remembering my past.
So thank you guys. We have had such a great time. We could have stayed here much longer. But like you said, a lot of people would like to have some beer wine
Yes.
and mingle and talk to you,
Yes.
kind of thing. But thank you so much.
Before we stop, I just want to thank Femi very much. We never met before, and I absolutely loved his book Lightseekers, and the power of crime fiction. It's set in all this kind of conflict and stuff going in around it. Yeah, and there's something fascinating about African crime fiction because it opens up the world and you go through in this kind of like story. So I would highly recommend those of you who haven't read it to read Lightseekers.
Yes, but I really think this is about before, but we've been friends for a while. Social media.
Twitter friend Elon Musk has tried to come between us.
Yes, Elon Musk tried it. And last year we were also really just chatting throughout, the end of the year. You were stuck here for a bit, remember? And all that. So I actually feel as if I've known you for a while. And thank you so much. And thank all of you for being so engaging and being so interested and sitting here through two writers self-indulging and all that. But we really, really hope that you enjoyed yourself, and thank you. This is the fullest I've seen the book then in a while, so great honor, great privilege, and
it's
really
very nice to come back home.
Yes,
So
yes.
thanks to Al-Marie and all the
Yes.
And so really at the end of the day, we are writers that write, in secret alone, but at the end of the day, for giving us the privilege to share our stories and our darkest, innermost.
If you buy them, we will sign. I'm interpreting.
Exactly.
If you buy them, we will sign.
Exactly. So please, reach out for the book, sign for it, and we're here. Thank you so much.
So there's a lot of quite surprising.